Welcome to our episode on birthing babies. Just wanted to let you know this is a little bit longer of an episode that we normally do, but it's very important to set the stages for the witch trials, which will be coming up in our next episodes. Also, wanted to add a disclaimer that while Sarah and I are researchers and historians, neither of us claim to be doctors or medical practitioners in any way. We are simply sharing historical midwife and birthing information today. So today we'll move forward with our podcast on birthing babies in colonial times. Thanks for joining us.
Where
Tell me
we
where
we
you
went?
tell me.
No, I wanted you to tell me where you went.
Okay. I made a list
Okay.
where I went. Where I went is a few places. I went to the Springfield timeline, and the years of 1645 and 1646 really stuck out for me because 15 babies were born during this time. And also during this time, there's a lot of these wonders happening. People are starving. All the people that got married in 42, 43 are now having babies. Lots of babies happening in Springfield during this time. Then I went down the rabbit trail of trying to find the midwife in Springfield, which was extremely difficult and that's one topic, because it was a company town and Winthrop, which you know about, was a doctor. He was, I think for a point in time there was no midwife there, but I finally found somebody.
Okay.
Okay, then the third one was I went into midwifery deep, like England practices, and the profession of it, how they were licensed. And then I found this book written by Elizabeth Ninell,
Okay.
and in 1600, right at the time when, and she was French, and she worked at the school where they were training doctors, but they also had a labor place. And so she was right on this intersection of these doctors coming in with their tools
Yes.
and her talking about you need to touch and you need to feel. And so I went deep into that. Then I went deep into childbed needs, so how it worked in that room. So there they are, what they did. But what I didn't get into is I didn't get them all in the room in the sense of like a script, like what's her name came in, but I got the players. I did not get into Welsh midwife practices. I did not get into the superstitions. I got more into the medical part.
Ooh, that's cool.
But I don't have any of the superstition part, which of course was part of it. I mean, they were linked. Healing was, anyway. And then one more thing, I didn't get in depth on the Agawam. So that's
That's
my
fine. I
report.
think we covered I think that will all just flow in when it needs to, including the superstition part, because that is going to be part of I'm more interested in the things you just listed off right now.
What
Your
did you what did you
midwifery
do?
and all of that.
So where
I
did
just
you go?
did a weird maybe I'm getting ready for the witch trials and trying to okay, I did a weird and I guess it comes together. I do have notes on superstition in midwifery from this book you gave me, a
Oh,
little bit.
perfect. Okay.
And then, also the transition from midwife to male doctor that
Mhm.
happened, so I can
Mhm.
just back you up on that.
Mhm.
And then I bought this book, I thought it was super thin, but it's super thick, and I just started reading it, and
Yeah.
it starts from so I'm gonna just fill it in and also whatever. This is
What is
not
it?
something we're gonna talk about today.
Okay. So yeah, we're kind of moving into where my general vibe is really kind of heading to the witches, but this idea of the midwife, the room where it happens, a lot of the it's this intersection of the superstition and the laws, and the men are not in the room. So there's something mysterious going on in there.
Mhm.
And that's where their communities are formed.
Mhm.
And that's where a lot of the misunderstanding comes in. Um,
Like, it's like
so
it's the one last place that men could go, right? They could take their industry, they could take their religion, they could take their spirituality, but this room where babies are born.
mhm. And what's fascinating to me is I in trying to I thought it would be easy to I thought there would be ton of scholarship on, midwives in colonial America. I thought it would be easy as Googling it and then someone describing the room, and then but there's a dearth of scholarship on it. In fact, right around the 1700s, when the doctors started being important and everything, and the witch trials happened,
Mhm.
it all pulled back into, the room again. And what happened was with this French lady, what she keeps talking about, she's watching it happen before her eyes, that these men, all of a sudden it becomes fashionable in Paris for the upper class women to not have midwives like the peasant ladies did, to not have their women in the
Oh.
room with them, to just have the doctor and maybe their husband in the room with them. And the doctor with his instruments, basically midwifery, and what she was trying to say is we don't need a man. She's like, they take their instruments, and you can look at the data, and the maternal deaths skyrocketed. And she goes into detail, like how they pull their heads out and how they, because they wouldn't touch the woman.
Mhm.
And so what happened, you can see that happening. That happened in Europe. It started happening in England. And then in New England, they always, because Pynchon and those guys, because it was a company town, I was under the impression that they brought a midwife over, that she was essential to the village or the town, and the Mayflower brought specific midwives over. I think Springfield with Pynchon and John Winthrop, right?
Mhm.
Winthrop, um,
Winthrop.
really favored doctors. And in fact, what I was struck by last night, just to get started on it, was I found in John Winthrop.
You have John Winthrop Sr., John Winthrop Jr., William Pynchon Sr., John Pynchon Jr.,
Right.
and they're
And who was
similar.
the alchemist? Who was the main
John
doctor?
Winthrop Jr.,
Okay.
so the son of the senior was the alchemist, and
Okay.
he's in the middle, so you had the first Parsons witch trial, and
Okay.
then he was in charge, and then he left, and then you had the final explosion in 1690s.
And I am looking right here. Yes. Okay. And you said he was an alchemist, right?
He's an alchemist.
And a physician,
Yeah,
right?
which would be that. Yes. So an
So and
alchemist, yeah. Science.
okay, so I'm going to recircle my sentence I started with, which is the topic that in Springfield in particular, you see a lot of pills being popped, of
Really?
Winthrop providing lots of medicine, of wandering doctors being in town. And they called him, I'm going to get the name wrong, Sharugan.
How do you spell it?
She yells about him every minute. Let me
Oh, a
see.
guy?
It's men with their instruments and they're doctors. They're not surgeons. Hirugery.
Very sure. Okay, don't here, I'll look it up.
Yeah, let's say it right, because this French midwife has a cow about it.
It's yeah, sure. It's probably because they spelled it weird. Sugary is an archaic term for surgery. They turned it scientific. They changed it to science. Well, it's always been scientific, but they it's like when I always talk about this. Galileo took the magic out of science. He separated, it used to be astrology was science, magic was science, mysticism. Like this is happening. It's derived from English and Old French, ultimately originated from the Greek word handwork. It refers to the medical practice of healing diseases and wounds with instruments and external applications.
Yes, and there's a lot of this lady Elizabeth says if any can imagine that the instrumentarians, the sugaries or whatever, with their crotchets, their forceps, and the rest of their iron and steel apparatus, had more in view of the relief of distressed females from the dangers to them in the ignorance of midwives than they had in their own interest. In other words, she said, there's not a worse sight than a man coming into a child, because midwives then and now all talk about fear and talk about how humor has to be in the birth room because the women has to open up and relax. And this lady's
Yeah.
like, they walk in with these instruments that look like daggers and they rip, you know, there's no touch, there's no humor, there's nothing that like heals the spiritual, what the woman needs, and so going on in this time period was obviously an intersection of chaos in doctors and in the New World, this sugary, what
Should
is
we look
it?
up how to pronounce it?
Yeah.
'Cause I
And it says, yeah, the practice of healing through physical intervention, which means you're not touching the woman anymore.
oh, it's a
The women,
hard K.
chirurgy.
Chirurgy. Let's have them sell. Let's hear it.
Yeah.
It's Kirurgere. K Rurgery.
Cagery.
How do I make it?
Oh, it
How do
says
I hear it?
I don't know. We need Ted.
We need to
Oh,
know.
and that's where the word curatage
Oh,
came
here it
from.
comes.
Childbirth.
Oh, chai what?
Childbirth.
Chirurgery.
Chirurgery. I am never gonna be able to
That
pronounce that. I
sounds
can't
like
even pronounce.
instruments cutting right there.
Yeah.
Chirurgery.
I can't even pronounce colonists. I won't be able to. Okay.
Anyway,
Okay.
the reason I spent a day or two trying to find the midwife in Springfield, and then it hit me, this wasn't your normal town. This was, like you say, a company town. And, Pynchon himself was always writing to Winthrop
Yes.
for drugs and help and medicine. I'm like, for his wife's courses and her menses? And I'm like, is there no midwife there? But let me close up all these extra threads I'm hanging. So the first thread was, at least in Springfield and Hartford was a big one. The midwives, as we saw all over, were being slowly pushed out of that room and slowly pushed out of, because that's their power, they could heal and help. And so, and you cannot find, there's maybe 3 books and some journal articles about midwives, but I think they disappeared and they went underground after the witch trials. And midwives were not always automatically seen as a witch, because in England, they were licensed.
Yeah.
They were usually to be safe. And in Denmark too, your wise woman or your healing woman would be usually married to a man of power
Yes.
so
That's what I was gonna bring up, is that there was a social separation between, um, not always, but what started happening in the colonies was that you had to have money to have access to so women, a lot of times the women in the colonies, but I just based on reading this book, so but they're saying that it would be the mayor's wife or the governor's wife or the wealthiest man in town's wife who had access to his library so she could read his books, and then
Oh,
had
right.
access to money, could send away for a tool or something to work with or experiment with. And so it was these wealthier women who would never be called in the beginning
In the
a
beginning.
witch. The one thing, and I'm gonna say this, I'm sorry, I am reading about the witch trials over in Scotland that kind of kicked off the
Okay.
handbook on how to hunt a witch and kill a witch
Yes.
by King James the First in Scotland, King James the Sixth. He's there. He's the king during, and he was super, super into hunting witches. And so he had a personal attack against him, he believed, by a bunch of witches up in Edinburgh, Scotland, in the North Berwick witches. And all I'm going to say about that is that the first woman, the way it was started as a young girl was a servant of a wealthy man, and she started going out at night. And she also started going to neighbors' houses who would have a sick child, or she was at childbirth. She just showed up places and knew how to do things. She knew how to save the day, kind of, with let's do this treatment, or and she was getting a reputation of knowledge about medicine and healing. And so her master or whatever, her person she worked with, beat her and tortured her because he was either jealous of her or in love with her or just sick, and got a confession out of her that she was an apprentice, basically an apprentice witch of one of the wealthiest women in town. So this very upstanding, wise, people went to her. I don't know if she would be considered the midwife, but she was this very reputable healing woman. And that's what started that spiral that got into the Bothwell guy and just created this huge witch trial over in Scotland, which these colonists, Winthrop totally would have known about. Pynchon would, they
Okay.
all would have known about that.
Okay.
To put a stop to it, well, what started this whole big bad thing was 100 years before the actual was that these women were dabbling in healing and stuff. So anyway, so I'm wondering if that is why they wanted men to be involved now or something like that. I don't know.
Another paper I read, she lists that as one of the reasons, obviously, why midwives in England, it was starting to happen, and then in the colonies, I love how you're applying their world there to this one. If a midwife was starting to make money, um, then pretty soon she might be called a witch.
Wow.
Yeah. Or we have examples of servant girls in New England, and you mentioned it, I think, a few weeks ago, where she was doing the same thing. She was going away at night. Um, but she was the one that started calling out other women in the town
Yes,
as,
this is what this other
you
girl
know,
did too. Same
oh,
thing.
really? So
Yes.
that's and I believe they get away with that because the birth chamber, the birthing room, and I can give a detail of what happens in there, but for weeks at a time, there is a rotating group of god sibs or women who are watching and caring for and talk, nothing to do but talk. And that's where a lot of the action happened, and the men aren't there, so they have to believe the talk that comes out of there. And in New England, a midwife, like you said, had the duty to extract confessions from the young women about if they were not married, about who had impregnated them. And those extractions, those confessions that they'd extract would stand up in court. And that's one
Wow.
way I found the midwives is I went through all the court trials and what women are testifying, like in Abigail Burt's case. And some of these
Wow.
young women, their mothers in 2 cases in the Connecticut Valley, the mothers, they knew they were obviously unwed daughters, and they purposely did not call the midwife. They delivered the babies themselves so that they could say she confessed that it was this guy, and she tried to get away with it in court to get support. So midwives held a lot of power, especially if they were married to a powerful man. They had legal power, they had knowledge, and they were
Yeah, and it's like, there's a social part to it too. If you don't like the midwife or you had a falling out with her, kinda like in that case, we talked about it before where the woman was trying to accuse, unless I'm blending them, the doctor of hopping in bed with her, right? And then it was the midwife that kinda came to her. That's fantastic. That sounds fantastic. So, it's wonderful. That I think it was the midwife, or they called her a wise older woman who kinda got her to confess, right? Maybe
Mhm.
I'm getting my
That was
story.
part of their job. No, so and that was one of the problems when they got to trial trying to the mother of the boys, like, she didn't have the midwife there, it doesn't count. When I was searching for a midwife in Springfield, I found a letter from Miles Morgan in 1661 to John Winthrop. And
Wow!
again, John Winthrop's usually he seems to be located in Hartford. He was down in Hartford,
Which is
um,
not very far.
which is 26 miles, but if you do the river, it would be very easy.
Right.
And I'm gonna find this letter that shows up of Miles because it helped me understand what was going on.
I'm looking up John Winthrop Jr. and Sr. just to see when they were in charge, which one they were dealing with. 1649.
Okay, I'm trying to find.
Okay, 1649 is when John Winthrop Sr. died, he's the guy that's quoted, brought the Puritans over, said we're gonna be a city on a hill, and then his son took over in 1649, and that's right about the time you said 1645, 1646?
What I look at it, those years are like a cauldron brewing, which caused the Parson case.
Okay, so 1634 is when Senior stopped being governor, though. Is that right?
So, yeah,
Okay, so that is like the bubbling.
yes.
Okay.
So let me read 3 things and see what you think about this. This is how I found the midwife, but this was interesting to me. I will go to a letter from John Winthrop Jr. to John Pynchon, sent 28th of May, 1655. John Pynchon, his wife was a mess. She spent a year with John Winthrop in Hartford trying to get better. But he sends this letter, and I'm like, okay, where's the midwife who would normally be doing this? But he said, my wife has now been staying with you about a year. Besides all her physic and pain, I pray let me know. Um, I have sent those for my wife, who I trust will be careful and tender of her. So he sent women to be with his wife. And then he mentions good wife Cooper, who hath formerly tended my wife in her weakness, says it used to be with my wife about the full moon, and if so, to have stayed a week, and then it would be worse. So I'm like, okay, so probably good wife Cooper.
Yeah, for
Thomas
sure.
Cooper's wife is someone. All right, so then you fast forward a little bit, and I found this letter. This is kind of what put it together for me. So 23rd of May, 1661, John Pynchon sends a letter to Winthrop
Okay. And that would have been his son. That would have been John Winthrop Jr., the alchemist.
Jr. And
Okay.
this is John Pynchon, who is William Pynchon's son,
Yes.
who's in charge of this town, right?
Yep.
So he sends this letter, and it seems like Hartford, Windsor, a letter can get there multiple times a day because people were canoeing and, from the warehouse down to Hartford. So he says, here's a Dutchman came from Fort Ariana in February last who has continued at Northampton ever since. He came to our town a week ago. He pretends skill in chirurgy, and indeed has done some cures at Northampton, as very credible persons do affirm. And since he came hither, hath done some things whereby it appears he has some skill. How far it will reach, I know not. He has taken Goodman Dorchester's leg in hand and thinks to cure it, and he says he thinks he can cure my daughter. He speaks very confidently thus far that he can bring her leg to rights and straight, and he offers to cure her for £60. And yet withal says he will have nothing for his pains if he do not make a perfect cure. So he's basically
Money back guarantee?
yes. Myself and my wife are fearful of meddling with him, being a stranger, lest he may do hurt. Therefore, he's been 8 days here, and I've entertained him at my house. He seems a sober man, and says he will use no launching nor violent means, but bathings, rubbings, and chafing the sinews, and that he tends to follow 2 or 3 days, night and day. He intends to take little or no sleep for 2 or 3 nights. Well, women for childbirth do that for weeks at a time.
Right.
A big deal, guy.
Right.
I thought at first he might be needy of money, and his aim might be to get some money, but he says I will not pay him one penny till I see it cured, see her go without crutches. I wonder if what you think of him. So this is May 23rd, 1661. And I'm thinking, where's the midwife in all this?
Yeah.
And then the same day, here's a letter from Miles Morgan, 23rd of May, 1661, to Winthrop. To Winthrop. The same day Pynchon's sending this letter. So both of these letters arrived to Winthrop in Hartford on 23rd of May. We've got Miles Morgan. Prudence has died the year before, and he's in Hartford with his young son. And Miles writes, Honored sir, when I was at Hartford, I was at your house desiring to speak with your worship about my lame boy. So same problems with the leg, and to have had your advice and help. But you were from home when I brought him to your house. And when I came the second time, you were also from home. And so I was prevented of your advice and help, which I much desired. And thereupon I carried him to Goodwife Watts and left him with her, which she was a midwife. Now, my humble request to your worship is that you would please see him and afford your help and advice, and see if it needful that he should be purged, or take any physic that would give him what physic you judge needful. I shall account it as a great favor and be ready to give you full satisfaction and content. Entreating your pardon for my boldness, I humbly take leave, your worshipful servant, Miles. So to paint this picture, in Miles Morgan, across the street from him, Thomas Pynchon has had this doctor guy at his house.
Yeah.
I am assuming Miles knew about it and maybe asked for his help, but instead he put his son in the canoe, went down 25 miles, and knocked on Winthrop's door, which means he was probably pretty desperate.
Yes.
And got no help. And then he took her to a midwife there. So then I'm like, why did he do that? Where's the midwife? Well, something's broken in Springfield,
Yeah.
So it just was interesting to me how this is evidence to me by 1661 of this women's network, this network of healers, had been broken down somehow.
Yes. Yes. I don't remember where I read it. There was a case, like, one of the very first things I read was, he has a name, and he wanted to observe the midwives, right? So that's
Oh,
all he wanted to
okay.
do. He might have been a reverend. Did you hear about this, or you know about this at
I've
all?
heard of cases of the reverends coming in.
And this guy started learning, and so then in the documents or commentaries, slowly then they started referring to him more. Dorothy Treat, her dad. Because at some point, if it wasn't going well, wouldn't they call a reverend or some kind of religious person to come
Yes, so I
be
guess I
there? A
yeah,
man?
and this lady discusses that too. She's like, so I thought, okay, well, what about you definitely what about the C-sections? Like in our world, C-sections are huge by a huge percentage happening all the time, which almost makes us believe you can't have a baby without it. And this lady's she says, based on hi, I wish I could talk in a straight line.
Do it. We're weaving. There are no straight lines. Flow. Flow, flow, flow. 'Cause I got you off track with the preacher thing. We were talking about Miles Morgan in the letter, so he had taken his son. What, can I ask a
So
question about that?
yes.
Um, do you think so obviously there wasn't the etiquette of making an appointment or calling card or anything, or leaving word with a servant that I'll be back tomorrow with my, like, isn't that weird?
I thought that was weird that Winthrop was so inaccessible to the normal people, but as I started to read his letters, he's writing 40 letters a day to people in his class, ups the general
Right.
people or whatever. Once or twice a little letter will come through that sounds a lot like Miles. In this letter, he doesn't sound like Captain Miles. He doesn't sound
No.
like a statue. He signs it your obedient servant. And so I think there was a lot of gatekeeping going on.
Servant who he left word with, and then also maybe
Yeah,
Winthrop himself.
and the fact that, Miles, well, he didn't have Prudence, so he wasn't plugged into this care network anymore of
Mhm.
women. He probably didn't know what to do. Let me tell you about Cooper, and then I'm gonna tell you about what a midwife does or did.
Awesome. Okay.
But I'm also gonna take this thread up that I started, which was why it's so difficult to find midwives or midwife practices. It's because in New England, we have an example of it right here of this woman's role and the job that had always been the childbirth room, which I'll talk about, but it was being actively usurped. And it was a,
Yes.
a man run town. Pynchon didn't bring a midwife to town. He was hoping it would show up, but he obviously wasn't that worried about it. Even though his wife sounded like she was having troubles with with all sorts of things, women
Yeah.
related. It was all taught word of mouth, generation of generation, usually families would get the midwife knowledge.
Oh, from mother to daughter kinda thing?
Only two books that exist, this French lady and an English woman who wrote about midwifery until the 1970s
What? I
when a
believe
group
it.
when a group of women and it started that whole my bodies
Mhm.
and da da da. There were no books about practice of if you were on your own, you better hope that you knew someone who had seen someone have a baby or not. And this lady says, why are there no manuals for women to know what their bodies looks like? She mentions two contemporary in the 1600s books written by men, and she's like one of them draws the woman's ovary or what, has built a model where the bladder is a beer thing, and she's like, nobody knows what's going on. And she said the reason we can't write books, the women, is that young men would use them as pornography.
Oh, yeah, always.
So that's the reason why you wouldn't see real drawings of
Yeah.
women in books.
Oh my
So there's not a lot of source material. A lot of it is passed down generation to generation. Um, a lot of it was a huge learning process in England, at least. Her other reason for why men wouldn't make good midwives is she says you have to start young. As a young girl, you apprentice and you attend the births and you have to learn. She said you have to learn how to touch and feel and know what you're feeling and know how to maneuver a body around just right. And she's like, babies are made to come out. You don't
Mhm.
need forceps. You don't, this 1600s lady, you just need, your fingers need to know what to do. And she says, I can't imagine a 16-year-old boy having to learn how to touch and feel the nuances of a woman's.
Right,
She's like, I can't imagine it. She said, but
right.
you cannot do this work without touch. And so these guys with their instruments, um,
Yeah.
and so in the 1970s, a lady called Ina May Gaskin, um, total hippie girl, but had had a horrible experience with birth. And her first baby, and mom talks about this, but the first baby, they took her in this room, and she says it looks like a torture chamber. And they actually tied her wrists down and her legs down. And then they gave her a choice. You can have twilight sleep, they called it, or gas, or be put out. And she said, you lying on your back, which she said all midwives know is not the best, not the perfect situation
Right.
for or doing
Yeah.
baby.
Body's not designed to do it that way.
She said it made us feel like women were not capable of giving birth. And her point was horses give birth, all mammals give birth. Humans are the only ones who have this belief built into them that we're not capable of it without help. And that stems, which she says her problem was, she couldn't, there was no inherited maternal knowledge anymore. And the only inheritance from these doctors coming in the 1600s and 1700s is that the belief and the fear that childbirth was scary and that really a lot of women can't do it very well. And her
Wow.
situation, they were a bunch of hippies, but smarter ones out of San Francisco who joined it. So now it's so passe, but they joined a bus caravan across the country and they were, you know, wandering, and the husband he was a professor. They were speaking in universities and stuff, and this whole caravan a mile long of school buses.
Oh, I would love that.
Yeah, I
I'd wanna be in
know.
that.
I know. She said we had our bus built a little higher and we had a loft in it,
How
and they
fun.
were all in their 20s, but she had gotten her master's in English. But they were all traveling together for months. And she said, we started to build this community. She said there were 6 or 7 of us pregnant on these buses. And um, she said one day we were outside of a campus and my husband was supposed to go speak. And one of the other husbands came to our bus and knocked on our door. And this you can see this on YouTube, and she's written some amazing stuff, but knocked on her bus door and said, my wife's having a baby, please come. Well, all the women came, some of them pregnant, some had babies the scary way, and there they are, like, you know I think she can do it. Like the mom giving birth had given birth on her own before. She's like, it's not, guys, just stay with me. It's not that hard.
Wow, she's educating all these hippie women on
Yes.
how to actually do it.
And so Ina Gaskin says it was the most spiritual experience I've ever had in my life. And she said, this woman just believed in her body, and we just sat with her and laughed and figured it out, and the baby came out. She said, you have to be patient. It takes a while. And this lady from the 1700s says the same thing. She's like, the reason men won't be able to do this is you have to be patient. It's
Mhm,
nature. You
mhm.
have to take the time to keep the woman calm and take the time to talk to her and know her and get her to open up, because she'll close up if she's scared. And this Ina Gaskin grew up on a farm, and she said, I believed that cows could do it. I had seen it. I'd seen animals give birth. And she said, none of those animals immediately walk away from their baby for 24 hours.
Right.
She said, that's what happened to me. I didn't see my baby for 24 hours. I woke up, slash. The first thing they would do is slash her. She
Yeah.
had a horrible experience. But she said, this woman in the bus, she pushed and she gave birth, and the baby crawled right to the nipple and started drinking. And she said, I've never seen a woman look so wildly beautiful as that woman,
Mhm.
and how all the endorphins were flooding over her. And it was this beautiful experience. And so she said, I felt a calling then. And she started to look for research and, how do you have a baby and blah, blah, blah. And there was none. And there truly is a dearth of scholarship. The ladies in the 1970s,
No, I am so excited.
but I found this book was written in 1973. So it's right, the feminist movement, it's called Witches, Midwives, and Nurses.
Oh, cool.
Look how thin it is. They researched as much as they could find. And so on
Wow.
this new edition, she talks about, um, she said, rereading it now, 40 years later, we find this book startling in its assertiveness, and for the most part, surprisingly accurate given the paucity of materials we originally had to work with. Um, and so she's talking about how we were not supposed to know anything about our own bodies or to participate in decision making about our own care. As girls, the women of our generation had grown up thinking of their reproductive organs as the unmentionable region down there. In the Ladies' Home Journal, which many of our mothers read, the medical advice column was entitled, Tell Me Doctor. I remember seeing that.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Women who asked too many questions or insisted, for example, on natural childbirth, frequently found themselves labeled right in the medical records as uncooperative or neurotic. Um,
Wow.
they had to relearn what their bodies looked like. The famous book, Our Bodies, Ourselves.
Uh-huh.
Um, it had it had all been cloaked and covered up. So this Ina Gaskin said she realized all the people of her time had an inherent belief that birth was a dangerous, scary experience. And she said, what we witnessed was the opposite. And so does this lady in the 1600s, noticing the same thing. She notes statistics on birthing, what happens after the instruments came in. She says, I've done 2,000 births, and one required me to call in the surgeon, just one. And she said the
Wow.
difference between the midwives of the 1600s, who were professionals and had licensed and taken a vow, um, and the men midwives, she called them, is that we know when to call in help. We are not so boastful that we realize you need a lot of women, you need a lot of help. And she said, and there are moments you have to recognize you do need a surgeon. She said, but you don't need a surgeon every time.
Right.
And
But
anyway, I'll make it short. There's a lot of statistics that both in our modern days and in the 1700s that show a rise in child mortality once instruments were once that whole notion that began as a fashionable thing in France became cemented into medical stuff. And you see that in Springfield when you've got witch hunts essentially
yes.
starting up because the mystery, they don't want that anymore. They don't
Right.
want the childbirth labor experience happening.
Right. So I have a couple questions and thoughts then. So you're saying that when it was just women doing it and getting together and doing it, when we go through like our family history and we see just about every woman has at least one child that died, you know,
Mm-hmm.
for then it goes up once the instruments and things start happening.
Yep.
That's really because Prudence never lost a child, right? She
No.
had all her babies. And then the other thing is, um, saying women died in childbirth and babies died all the time. There's a lot of different reasons. A lot of babies lived for a week and then died. So it wasn't necessarily in childbirth that they died. So many babies lived for a week or two. It was whatever was happening after illness, or
Yes.
prenatal care probably wasn't so great. And so maybe the baby was kind of doomed from conception.
I mean, there's always been what everyone considers as a high death rate, but both, her name's Elizabeth in the
Okay.
1700s, and then Ina Gaskin in the 70s, both say attribute part of that to this lady's really mad about it is that patience thing again. She said, I would never, the 1700 ladies, they're with them for 2 weeks before birth
Hmm.
and they're with them for 3 weeks after. And she said, these doctors come in and cut and then they leave. And she gives examples of, and it happens to midwives too, but examples of they will come in and they're in a hurry. They'll use their instruments, grab the baby out, the forceps in the 1700s and in the 70s,
Right.
and leave and leave within 24 hours. And then she said a midwife will stay and will swaddle the womb and will watch the woman. She says it's not a surprise to me because if the placenta wasn't totally taken
Right.
out,
Right.
um, you won't see the lady will look just fine and then she'll suddenly start dying on you.
Right.
And this lady's really calm about it. She's like, there's probably something there that shouldn't be there. You need to go in and clean it out. And then the 70s lady says the same thing. She says, you don't just walk away from a woman who's had a baby. And she's like, there are ways to deal with this if you're there. And both
Right.
of them state, what about breech birth and what about da da da? And both of them say it takes patience and touch. You have to move that woman, make her walk. This lady's very specific, like get your hand in there and do this certain thing and lift their chin up and da 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 da.
Wow.
Um, because I was skeptical at first. I had all my babies cesarean section and I thought that like I had to. And maybe I did. I'm not questioning that at all, but and grateful we have it.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, but that experience, so the Gaskins went on, they developed a communal living called the farm, and they lived
Okay.
next to an Amish old world community who had been birthing their babies for years. And she said, we just realized we needed to learn how to do this. And um, she's like, we were amazed at how natural it is, but she says, you have to be patient. You can't go in there and hope that that baby will be done like a turkey in the oven.
Right.
You have to sit with them, you have to come back, and,
Yeah.
um
This is the thing that keeps popping into my mind from way, like, in the beginning when you started talking about this with the men, 'cause at for some reason when you were described like, the women go in this room. These houses aren't really huge, so if you're the man, your wife's ready to have a baby. So, the first time in your whole experience of a man, probably you're shut out. You're on the outside of the door, right? You're the one in the corner listening in with the ear. It's like the woman always is in all the meetings and things. Now you're on the outside and you
yeah,
hear the voices. I'm sure there's laughter, there's silliness. That's just how women are. The best way I can think of it is think of Thanksgiving. You have the
yep,
kitchen and then the football, the family room, and the men are in the room and the men are out here and the women are in the kitchen, and there's laughter, and there's work, and there's techniques, and there's a blending of traditions and skills and how to do this and advice, and maybe there's even, like, hurt feelings that she did it wrong or she's not listening. All this magic, women's magic that a man can see if you have to think of or anyone right now has to think about what it would have been like in that room. That Think of a big dinner where the women are in the kitchen and what's going on there, and sit there and watch it and listen. Children, I mean, it's almost hypnotizing.
yeah,
It's that show, The Bear, does an excellent job on. I don't know if you watch it or not. I mean, it's really intense and kinda terrible, but the whole that energy is exactly what's happening now in the midwifery, or in the birthing room, right? And the
yes,
men are on the outside and they're hearing it, and the women will come out and he might ask a question and she maybe was like, "Well, now he's the uneducated one, the uninformed one, out of the fun, he's the not even
yeah,
having fun,"
yeah,
you know?
yeah,
And you described the endorphins in this big, hot, beautiful woman just doing this amazing thing,
mhm,
and if you wanna bring, like, um usually that's what the man gets to see in his spouse, right? That's
yes,
that
that's
look of hot and, oh, whatever you wanna call it.
ravaged.
Yeah. Is usually for the marital bed, or that's where he's the
Right,
only person that ever gets to see his wife out of her bonnet and in this natural, fantastic way, and now there's a room full of all his neighbors and wives, surely some women he doesn't like,
mhm,
maybe his mother and his sisters, now seeing his wife in this way. I mean,
mhm,
it's just and doing this magical thing of bringing life to out, you know, creating life and bringing life. So, of course, they would want in on that, and then I'm thinking, "Okay, well, cooking also is patience, it's a lot of prep before, it's a lot of knowledge during, and it's a lot of patience after." Well,
mhm,
and then I just started thinking, "Okay, well, women have been great that the kitchen, the woman's world is the kitchen and the birthing room." And then look at us today now, it's male doctors, female doctors too, but, the stereotypical, and then male chefs. The same kind of magic has been I'm
yeah,
happy for
I
male
mean,
chefs and I'm happy for male doctors, but yeah, that energy of it.
I love how you're saying that because I guess this is a good time to go into that more how someone describes what it would look like in that room. Um, but both women talk about the magic in that room and the power of groups of women coming together and this I know one from the 70s who they are a whole com- thing now. They're known for their midwifery. They do all the Amish women, but, she talks about the spiritual, that you have to keep this port she's like she talks about opening a portal, essentially, and she does too. She's like, "You have to watch this woman. Sometimes she needs to laugh.
Yeah.
Sometimes she needs to cry. Sometimes, she the '70s ladies talked about one woman where you're in this room with her, and she was a singer. She said, "You have to know your woman. She's a singer," and so right during the worst birth
Mm.
pain when she said, I can't do it," you can feel the the what's it called now? The
What's the
cervix.
word?
The cervix will close. If
Oh,
she's
with stress?
scared if she's scared,
Wow.
this lady mentions you need to be careful of who walks in that room, because if someone with a bad energy, someone who is maybe mean to the lady, she'll close up.
Wow.
She said you have to keep her open. So the Ina Gaskins, the '70s lady said, I knew at that moment that this woman loved to sing, and that calmed her down. And I said, I we started to sing together. And she said everything opened up and the baby came out.
Wow.
And so you've got this image that you're talking about of these trusted women working together, a lot of them who had had babies and knew about it, trying to keep this spiritual connection open. And then the modern ladies talk about, yes, there are endorphins that come in, and 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 then I think what you're saying, I didn't feel any endorphins in my hospital room. I felt totally helpless.
Mhm.
And the impression was, you can't do this without us. Um, you
Mhm.
know, just this belief that somehow we're the only mammal that can't figure this out.
Mhm.
But both the modern and the old one talk about its nature. And your job as a midwife is to be patient and read the room and read the energy, read the spirits. And that's why there's such a synergy between these old world superstitions and the practice of being a midwife. You had both coming together in that room.
Yeah. I mean, think of the magic that's happening is a a mother-child what they're really there for is to experience and assist in the most magical relationship I think that there is just a mother and her new baby,
Yeah.
right? And there's, the unspoken I remember when Raymond was born, he was a fantastic little newborn in the hospital room, but he started crying. He was all changed, fed, swaddled perfectly in his little plastic box. The nurses were in, Brandon was in, I was in there, I was asleep, and he was crying, and I remember knowing right away, like, he just needs my warmth, like, that's all he wants. And
Whoa.
and I can hear their voices like, "Oh, well, is he fed? Yes, he's fed. Well, should we change him? Yeah, check his diaper." And the whole time I'm like, "He just wants my warmth." So finally I'm like, "Just bring him over, like, in sleep, bring him over, put him here on my arm." And they did that, and he instantly fell asleep. So this connection, I mean, just like if you were outside of the house, I imagine this birthing room would be glowing with
Yes.
energy and spirits and this magical thing that's happening.
Yes. And the both ladies again talk about the spiritual woo-woo things that happen at that moment of birth. The modern one will talk about, you might have swallows lining up on the window
Ooh,
sill.
cool.
You might have, like a sudden burst of, you're in a thunderstorm giving birth, and then there's the sunshine, and this lady's like, "It's just it's what that's what happens. It's this beautiful where nature comes together in this moment." And this lady mentions it too, and she said, "You won't have that if someone's in there with forceps pulling your
Yeah,
baby's arm out, or telling you
right.
to hurry." I had that with my first baby. It was Halloween, and I'd gone into work, and I had an appointment at 11 with the doctor, whatever, went into the hospital for the appointment. Water broke, and then everything stopped. They put me in my bed, and you hear the baby's heartbeat. And the doctor, who was a woman, came in. I was bugged with her anyway, because at one of my appointments, she had her arm halfway up me, and she was like, "Your scarf is so pretty." I'm like, "I
I
do
know.
not want to know."
I know, it's terrible. So do you have
Uh,
any plans for the weekend?
no,
What? What's the
when you
weekend?
get
Yeah.
your hand out of me, maybe, but I
Yeah.
didn't want that. And um, but as the labor was slowing down, she actually said, she's like, "Oh man, I this needs to speed up. I've got a Halloween party I've got to go to."
Oh. Ugh.
So both this lady and both the modern lady would say, "No,
No,
you,"
no.
and the doctors, these surgeons would usually have multiple patients they'd go to, so
Oh,
they
yes, I was gonna mention that.
yeah,
Yes. So they're gonna travel all over. I was reading this one guy I was reading about, and I don't know where I was reading about him, who wanted to stand in. He stood in as a religious guy, and then he had like, what if you?" And then he started asking questions, and then pretty soon he was the guy in charge. But he would travel all from so if you're a woman in Springfield having a baby, this guy would have been over in Windsor, Hartfield, Deerfield, and then you have the women come in, but they probably feel like substitutes. There's that energy shift of, we're
yes,
not really in charge, we're waiting for the man to show up, right? Or
right. It's the power thing. It's in um these women speak of the most important thing is that the woman believes in herself, and that um she believes in the midwives, and there's confidence. There's not a
yeah,
there's enough confidence that if you need someone who doesn't have your skills, you're going to call them in to help. Like, they talk about always calling another midwife who's seen this before. I mean, it resonated with me, because at the minute she said that, you're already vulnerable, you're weak, you know, you feel you walk through the valley of death that when you're pushing at a certain point in
yeah,
time. Um, but to have her be inconvenienced by my labor
right.
was awful.
And you also know that you are what I felt, because I had 5 C-sections, so that's 5 times getting strapped. You're strapped
Mhm.
and you're cloaked, and the dad gets to be like, you're just, and you feel the tugs and stuff, and then you hear the conversation before of like, "What are you doing this weekend? Oh, and did you hear Bob?" And yeah, his like the chit chat, and it's this completely sterile, safe. Like, I chose that, I needed it. Like you said, grateful for it. But I was very aware still of something above all of that happening just for me and this baby. Like, and so then to have this woman be like, "I gotta hurry up for a Halloween party," because she could have tapped into, like, I believe our brother-in-law who does this has an ability to tap into that energy that's happening, the woman and the
Yes.
baby. Like, men
Yes,
can do that, women can, it's
for
possible.
sure. For sure.
But then you put it in this sterile environment, and you in the back in the colonial times, you put it in where you're now waiting for the man to show up. That energy isn't you can't that portal, the energy isn't there for you to tap into it unless
Mhm.
you know, we're not doing ourselves favors here.
This is a scholarly paper that kinda tries to describe what typically happened in the 1600s in colonial
'Kay.
Massachusetts. So, it's called The Healer's Calling. It was published in, of course, like, 2002, which means she from the '70s lady, trying to find stuff, it's expanded a little, but not a lot. But she said childbirth followed this course. When the first signs of labor began to appear,
No,
the
it's
woman the woman would get out the childbed linen she had set aside, so it's special sheets, special
ooh, I
bedding,
love that.
and make up her bed. while the contractions were still mild and far apart, she would continue with her chores, or as some manuals recommended, walk around the house. And both of these ladies, the Ina Gaskin shows her ladies in her clinic, when you first start labor, don't go to bed. That would be a good time to can your peaches. That would be a good time to start a
Okay.
project, take your mind off it, or to walk around. This lady says the same thing. In 1600s, they'd start watching the woman about a week ahead of time, which means someone would be there in the house, in and out all day. And it says, when the labor pains increased in intensity and it became clear that this was no false alarm, she would send her husband for the midwife and the neighbors. So his job, he had a specific job, and there was a name for it, um, where when the wife said, "I need everybody," he'd go out and knock on the midwife's door, and then he'd knock on some other doors that, were important, the people the woman wanted in her circle. And it was very important that they were people she was comfortable with, which makes me think
For
of
sure.
Mary Lewis and Widow Marshfield, who had a contentious in the childbirth room. This Ina Gaskins, the 70s lady, speaks of that too. She speaks of, if someone walks in and you feel that energy go away, you have to send them out of the room.
Wow.
Husbands in the 70s were allowed to be there, but but she said if you could see that she was closing up or he was not adding to the vibe, he had to go. Um, so the midwives ruled the roost, essentially. They were taking
Yeah.
the temperatures of everyone there. They were really honed in on the woman. They weren't messing with her. Sometimes the midwife would show up 2 days before, 3 days before, and help her cook and help her keep busy, keep her humor up, keep her not
Yeah.
scared. So there are stories of husbands going around knocking on the doors, and after arriving, the midwife might build up a fire if the day was cold, and set up her birthing stool if she had one. Most midwives and most of the women in the colonial towns were really adept with making home medicines. They knew their herbs. The the husband had brewed a special late grunting beer, that had a little more alcohol in it. Um, they would have special drinks to give her. We had talked about that, I think, before. One was with milk and sugar warmed up. Um, there was alcohol. A lot of what, the midwife knew. Let's say she's constipated, she'd give her castor oil. Even the modern ones knew that. Or she was just watching all the humors.
Sorry,
Um,
my Diet Coke is being delivered.
oh, speaking of men entering the room.
I know, with a good vibe or a bad vibe? Okay, thank you.
Oh,
Okay.
hi. Hi, man.
Yes, so bye. Thank you.
Oh,
Yay! Cheers. Okay.
cheers.
Yeah. Mazel tov.
Okay, Diet Coke. So anyway, she comes in,
'Kay.
and the men and children would be shooed from the room, and the neighbors and midwife would make provisions for privacy. And they talk about how in colonial, we've talked about how packed the houses are, how difficult that
Yes,
would to
because
get the man out.
some of them, they don't have real separation of rooms.
No, so
So
this says they would usually, at the best, the midwife would bring, or the wife would have already set up curtains drawn closely around the bed. She said in other wealthier families, a separate room was set aside. And then here comes the touching part. The midwife would lubricate her hands with butter, almond oil, or lard and perform an internal examination to check the dilation. Once she had done that, the midwife could announce how long a wait would be. So that's where that touch is really important.
I thought you meant touching, like, emotional. Okay.
Oh, no, no, like, literally, like, hands all over her, like,
Yeah, with butter and
hours, like softening the cervix,
but
and
that's good because that's probably why they didn't have to cut so quick either.
that was the whole point of it.
That's
So
so
for
smart and
hours before,
nice.
and she said that there were certain spots you could touch that would make pain go away. So both of these, our modern lady and our old lady, said they they could alleviate a lot of the pain with the touching, with
Gosh.
the prepping, with the
Mm.
making sure the lady was happy, in a good mood, with the all of that stuff. The focus was on that woman and coaxing her body to relax. Um,
Yeah.
and one midwife talked about, she this not one, the 7 this lady gets very detailed. You're probably touching and in there for hours,
Wow.
essentially. Yeah. Um, but the modern woman talks about, do your initial touching. You can hear the baby's heartbeat with a piece of wood that they hold to the stomach, and they could monitor the heartbeat with. But you
Wow.
have all of this requires touching. All of this requires closeness. If she's
And
scared,
and
someone
and
might lay in bed and hug her.
and graphically, it probably has smells and fluids,
Yeah.
bodily gases, and just, like, how intimate that is. No wonder nurses and doctors have a certain gift
You're
of
grossed out right now. That's
I
that
just it takes this very special person to do
it
that.
it does, but it also doesn't, in a sense, because in this YouTube video, the Gascon describes her initial revulsion or fear,
Yeah,
and then
right,
she
right.
realized, no. What she realized is, if she sensed her patient feeling that same revulsion and fear, she says, "Talk to them about their pelvis. Talk to them about how great their body's working, and
"Oop, you just let out a toot.
yes, that's
Oh, that's more room for the
wonderful."
baby." Yeah.
It's like, so that whole kind of opening up language where you love your, you know
Yeah.
she says at one point in a TED Talk, she's like, "Think about all the wonderful things our bottoms can do, and we're so disgusted with them, but look at all the wonderful things that happen down there."
Uh-huh.
I'm like, "I don't know." Um, but until the waters broke, the midwife and her assistants would encourage the woman to walk in labor, to walk around the room. If she was weak, some of the attendants would prepare broth or boil eggs. Mostly all the assembled women could do was wait. Now is the time for the exchange of gossip and news, or for
Yeah.
comparing stories of past travails. Usually, unless the mother to be was in unusual pain, this was likely a cheerful and celebratory time, with conversation peppered with jokes and bawdy,
Yeah.
BAWDY stories.
Right, raunchy.
And I love the Danish. I'm always doing the Danish, but in
Yeah,
the
good.
Danish birthing room, there are stories where the men were out. They're drinking a lot. They were celebrating,
Mhm.
and the men would be knocking on the door, "Quiet down in there," and they were just having a great time in there. Um, if things began to go wrong, a good midwife had skills. She knew how to turn the child in the womb. They had medicinal recipes at their disposal to give strength to the mother and hasten labor. Um, when they increased and grew to pushing stage of labor, 2 or more assembled women would assist the mother to her birth stool at the edge of the bed. So the birth stool, um, my friend Nanette, her mom actually had bought a lot in Spain years ago, a birthing stool, and it looks like a
Wow.
U. It looks like almost a toilet seat, but it's down low to the ground. Um, and often in colonial times, midwives would use, and even modern, they use scarves, long scarves, like the same that would wrap your baby and walk around in for a woman to hold on.
Oh,
And because this woman and the other woman both say if you can get a woman to pull down on something, it will open things up. Um, so it looks very different than what we think about it.
it
Um,
makes sense. Menopause.
yeah. So, okay, so then women would hold her under the arms, others would support her back or legs. The midwife would position herself to catch the child as it emerged. The midwife would coat her hands with oil and butter and massage the woman's stomach with each contraction and lubricate the birth canal. After child was born, the midwife would place the child on the chest, which that Gaskin said is so important.
Yeah, and they do now. That's like a thing. I remember when that was a new kind of,
Like the skin to skin.
yeah, the skin to
I
skin,
thought,
the
oh,
trend. It was a trend, the trend of skin to skin and put it right there. And, it's not a new trend. That's That totally makes sense, and absolutely, yeah.
and yeah, and they wouldn't take the baby in another room. They'd do this all right with the mother. They'd bathe the child, swaddle it, put it in on the mother again. Um, Meanwhile, the midwife would swaddle the mother's thighs and belly with some of the linen. So this swaddling prevented cold air from entering the womb and inciting childbirth fever.
Oh,
And
interesting.
in one of the witch trial cases, one of the women accused the midwife of swaddling her belly wrong so that it created wrinkles.
Oh,
And so I
interesting.
guess it had another purpose to kinda smooth out the stomach.
Probably
Um,
also to, get the rest of everything out.
yeah,
Take away the flow and the heaviness of afterbirth
yes,
and all that.
yeah, yep,
Okay. That
and,
actually would've felt really nice, I
I
think.
know. To have your
Okay.
baby on you and a
And
warm
then you're getting all
fire.
swaddled tight.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah. And then if she was still in pain, the neighbors would give her a cordial or drink to soothe the so-called after pains. Um, any bloody or stained cloth would be taken away, and the mother would be officially put to bed, where she would lie for 2 weeks to a month.
fantastic.
One of the neighbor women, teenage girl or paid nurse, would stay with her to help with chores. The other women would disperse, but return in a day or two for a celebratory meal. So
Oh,
the mother was in charge of bringing all the ladies that were in the birthing room back to her home and, feed them. Like, there's lists of the feast. The men would write down the list, like, "We had roast beef, and we had da da da, and we had da da, lots of wine," and they would all the mother would be in the bed with the baby, and they'd all be having a great dinner,
how
and
fantastic. I
I would have
love
loved
it.
that. I just love it.
That's like having cakes and ale after or something. That's
Yes.
fantastic.
So it was a more holistic experience. So if it was good, you can see it was really good. And if you're looking at Springfield, in that
40.
1646, where 15 babies were born in 1 year, they were doing that a lot, you know?
And we don't think they had a we think Goody Cooper was maybe a secret midwife for
I
Springfield?
do. I believe
Okay.
that Goody Cooper,
I
and
need to just look at my database, so I'm gonna look weird for a minute, but I'm looking at my screen here.
I wrote about her. She I believe that, her name is Sarah Cooper. She was Thomas Cooper's wife. He is a carpenter. I'm just gonna do this from memory, I guess. He is listed, very interesting enough, as one of the biggest, guys that owed pension money and also went through
Okay,
money.
this is what I just looked up. I looked up
Okay,
the court
you
docs. So
say it.
Thomas Cooper in 1655, 1658, 1660, 1, 2, 3, sued all about debts. Debt, 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 debt. He owed a lot of people debts.
Yeah. And one thing one writer noted about that was that idea of sometimes Pynchon your relationship with Pynchon. Sometimes he'd be really forgiving of
Oh,
people's debts,
for sure.
right?
Yes, he would even change his mind about things that he had officially said and then change his mind. Yes, for sure.
Yeah, so the weird that I'm glad you said that because the weird thing this author mentioned was, how no matter how, in debt this Cooper was, he never really was called in on it. And in fact, he thrived. There's a moment where you see Hugh Parsons frustrated because he and Thomas Cooper are at the same level of wealth or whatever, but Thomas Cooper can somehow afford to go in on auction with someone else, and his wife's at the store buying what she buys at the store is very telling to me that she is a midwife because she buys linens, she buys soap, she buys, cloth cotton materials. I'm trying to find my notes.
Look at where Thomas Cooper sits at church. Right there in the front row.
And he's a carpenter.
He sits right next to Roland Stebbins and Robert Ashley.
Wow, yeah. Um, yes.
Because 'Cause they're older, right? If she's being called Goody.
Yes. And so this is what she buys at the store that made Hugh so mad. She was always buying cloth, linen, pens, paper. Um, and why would a woman, just your average woman who was not literate, be
I was
buying
just gonna
pens
say
and
she's
paper?
doing spells and stuff. She's doing
Yeah,
something,
or she's
yeah.
keeping her books. I
Uh-huh.
think she was contributing to the family income. I think she could pay off the debt with the midwife stuff, possibly.
Yes.
And they did say that,
I said spells. You're right, she's probably just doing
no,
business bookkeeping.
that's part of it. I mean, there were spells. They were selling what's interesting about them is they were also known in town for resetting fractures, for creating their own medicine and selling it to people. So they were basically like a homemade pharmacy. So they both were in this business of health.
Mhm.
So I definitely think she was the midwife, and I do
Okay.
believe that Widow Marshfield was possibly another midwife because she shows up waiting at people's bedsides and leaving in the night, so a teenager would come watch the woman, but then she'd come back in the morning. Um, so
Can
definitely and she was of the higher class. Um, so yeah. So what do you
Yeah,
think
she's
of that?
the one that accused, Mary Parsons as being a witch
Right.
in 1641.
Right.
So she would be, uh yeah, and her husband that's interesting. Her
Oh, did you
husband
freeze? I think you
Oh, sorry.
froze.
Oh, I'm here. Okay. Um, yeah, so she I don't know. I don't know. To
Widow
accuse someone
Marsh
of being a witch, you have to be pretty secure with yourself in the community, you know, pretty certain
well,
that you won't get
yes, and the way that security is arranged with the women at least is everything goes down in that childbirth room, you know,
Mhm.
for good or for evil.
It's the golf course.
Yeah, it
Deals
is.
and
It is
relationships, uh-huh.
because, sudden word like the girl, if she yells out, "Archie did it," or whatever, the
Yeah,
midwife's gonna note that. You've got Mary Lewis who Parsons Mary I'm sorry, Mary Parsons married to Hugh, which in a few years from now will be called a witch and
yeah.
call other women
Accused
witches.
of being a witch, yeah.
Um, and that starts from, I think, a little bit of envy with Marshfield walking into town and probably as a midwife, probably really getting to know all these 15 women
Yeah.
who were all pregnant, who were all attending each other's births, who were all watching their babies die. You look at Reese Bedortha's wife, Blanche, who was at Mary Lewis's birth and had to stand up in court and say, support Marshfield in that.
Yeah, interesting.
So there's a lot going on when they're birthing babies.
Yeah.
Um, a lot. I thought it would be all charms and spells and curses and it's more, the superstitions and the science live together in that world.
Yes, and that's such an important point because again, that separation between magic and magic, you know what I'm saying? It's science and esoteric and the exoteric, right? Like the
Right.
division of the two. And what an easy way to discredit or make fun or call crazy. Um if you wanted to separate it out, just like we were talking about before with the comet and all that, if you want to have really wise, smart people not look into something, call it, label it a bunch of really scary, funny, goofy, dumb things, and then no one will give it the time of day. So if you want to discredit women's work,
Right.
call it crazy, call it witchy, scare people with it, call it evil, call it the devil. Like, that's what was happening at this time. King Henry VIII had reformed the church and he had brought the devil from the countryside where everybody blamed the devil on everything and then brought it in that no, it's actually witches and women. And then James, who then he was after Elizabeth on a big witch hunt, and he was giving the handbook on how to find witches. So basically labeling all this magic, spell, charm stuff as evil and then saying it's women doing it, that when women weren't, they just knew how to do herbs, they knew how to hear a heartbeat with a block of wood, and they knew how to do these things. And when you want to combine that with other things, it's really easy to say, okay, let's just have a man, let's just have, you know, this is all silly and goofy. And look how long that lasted then. If we're talking
Right.
from 1640s to 1970s in our culture, right, in America,
Yeah, in America.
that's so enduring. And then, so I watched my polygamous show,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, as one does.
as one does. And it's home births. They all do home births because they said that historically they were too afraid to go to hospitals because they wouldn't be able to say who the dad was or afraid that somebody would report them on and so they're very into home births. And so it was happening. It existed, the tradition and the knowledge, and there are midwives. And even the practice of midwifery has been regulated, and don't they have to have certificates and things like that? I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm going off, but
No, I like your
it's
point.
just
Keep going.
it's just interesting how you can discredit something by calling it something spooky and woo-woo when,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, maybe that was blended at some time, but you divide it out and you still keep that you I don't know, just put a stigma on it and then
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, it's interesting how they talk about the stigma, what you're saying, and how effective that was.
Yeah.
How you insert the devil into normal environmental things, and all of a sudden you're surrounded by evil. You insert a witch into the childbirthing room, then you're talking life and death.
Mhm.
Then you're talking blame.
Yeah.
And, think the stakes are pretty high.
Do you
Then
think Oh, sorry. Do you
No, go
think
ahead.
there were some families or couples that had to have that conversation about, Goody Marshall, I think she might be are you comfortable with all her
Yeah,
herbs and prayers? Prayers were they switched prayer into a spell. They changed
yeah,
praying over and they called it a spell work then. That was something else that
exactly.
was happening. So,
Exactly. I mean, that's the other husband's job was to gather the neighbors and then to go and get the minister and pray with him. And that was his only the other job. But Cotton Mather,
yeah.
he wrote a book
Yeah, he did.
for women about ready to give birth. And he essentially calls them he's stirring a cauldron of fear with his words, like you're
Mhm.
saying. He says, "Get ready to meet death. You've brought this upon yourself. You've got 9 months now. Get your spiritual affairs in order." And then he offers these prayers they can say to keep the devil away and, um, basically creating the exact opposite of what these midwives say, creating fear in the childbirth room, which can't be there. You
Yeah,
know,
can't be
the
there.
mother's going into this with fear. When before it was eased in by the women in your life, your grandmothers. If you're 12, you've seen lots of births. You've stayed up night with a woman. You've learned the touch. You've learned that there's nothing scary or mysterious. But Cotton Mather it's a perfect example of closing that door.
Yeah, it really is, and calling it something evil. Um, and in this book, it's this part, it's talking about, I guess, in blood there's a blood stopping prayer that's
Mhm.
pretty known in folk, and, but so there was a stop blood, a gift that was frequently passed down in families. In some cases, it can only pass from one sex to the other. Um, so a mother could teach it to her son, and her son could teach it to his daughter, which is
Okay.
interesting. But, the prayer itself was a source of power. It was almost a clairvoyance as well as a healing power. So that was happening even then. So yeah, so the men would gather and say their prayer, but there was a certain type of prayer happening in the women's room to as a tool to heal, but then they labeled that a spell and a witchcraft and
Easily see how, in an outsider's point of view, sitting in the other room while there's 20 women in your house laughing and talking, and there were specific songs for labor, songs to calm the mother down, like "You are doing great," da da da, which they turned into chants, or you could see
Oh,
that turning
wow.
into a coven. You can see that into spells. Um, Women used that energy and that power and words to affect healing, and you see that a lot in Springfield in the witch trials where they're like, "Well, she
Yes, a
sang us
mother
said words over."
uttered, yeah, she
Yes,
uttered as she
uttered.
walked away or yes, uh-huh,
Yeah.
mhm.
So there's that
Wow.
topsy-turvy, double-edged sword there.
Yeah, what a crazy time to just try to surviving,
Yes.
just to
I
have
mean,
babies and
I know, and to have your confidence taken away. Let's see. Yeah, it was a terrible time. 1645. They're starving. There's unsettling rumors. 1645, when you've got 15 women in labor, pregnant, postpartum, all sorts of problems.
yeah,
Um, Only 100 people in town. You've got unsettling rumors of imminent Dutch assault supported by native allies. You've got the English dealing with the threat of discord among towns and Indians. You've got pensions emerging legislation to tackle disorders that too often fall people array. You have phenomenon. Rainbows surrounded by bright lights appeared over Boston. In Ipswich, people gathered to see a cow with 3 heads. Winthrop states in this year, what these prodigies portend, we cannot know. You've got all sorts of weird earthquakes and hurricanes and drought and contagion. English and Indians were stricken by agues and marsh fever. Um, 14th of May in this year, Blanche Bedortha gave birth, after which preparation was made for marriage. The child died before being named. Um, they blamed Blanche for that.
Wow.
And
That's right.
Moxon, their reverend in the same town while this is happening, said the devil was no mere trickster, but rather a monster defined by perpetual fog and restless intrusions into your daily life. And Pynchon summed up that year by saying, "We have had a hand of God upon us." Same year, that summer, the corn was devoured by caterpillars. He said, "The Lord affects our hearts." Um,
Wow.
you've got a lot going on. You have babies dying. You've got
Yeah.
mothers giving birth. And then you've got these inserted into that, the devil, these new beliefs, witchcraft.
Yeah. This was
I
also I'm going so far back. This was 16, 20, 46. Oh no. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Because I'm Mary Burt. I'm going back to Mary Burt in my head just for a minute.
Yes, you
We
should. I kept
edit this
thinking
out
about
for a minute, but it was 1655 when all of this was happening, 1641. I mean, this was these are the people, the generation that was so the people having babies right now would have not been the original Puritans that came over. It's their kids having babies now. So you have the original Puritan people being the older group, the more
yeah,
judgmental, the more in charge. And then you have this newer generation that is maybe not so on board with all the Puritan
right.
rules and lifestyle, and then, like you said, you have all this the drama with politics, with the fear of the indigenous, the French and the Catholic, and
Yeah,
then the most basic thing, the most solid sure thing that you know as a woman is how babies have been born and how women have helped with like, you brought that over from your mom brought that over from what potion to make, or and then to be told that that's evil. And then this is all the same time that is over here making laws. He turns it to a capital punishment. So now it's even if you have a pet in this book, if you had a cat or pet, you could be hung, for
yeah,
having a familiar. And so that just how, and then you have the reverend who wants to turn into the doctor and the rich wife that wants to come over, and it's just,
yeah. I mean,
yeah,
you've got strange medicine. You've got
yeah,
the leaders of your town asking for red coral or asking for shipments of other things. And you've got John Pynchon's wife, who was one of the biggest, like Winthrop was kind of a drug dealer. Like he was supplying lots of drugs into Springfield, medicines and concoctions. Hugh Parsons was buying them for Mary Lewis. Um, you've got that going on. And then you've got this, it's like a village that was created just for business. So there's no heart to it.
right.
There's no belonging. There's no
Yeah,
hundreds years of traditions. Like you're saying, women are like the women in the 70s who didn't even know how birth worked. You've got these women over in this colonies that, Springfield didn't, I don't think really had a midwife. I think they were, I know Cooper was, I know Marshfield was, but they seemed to rely a lot on the people down the river. So
mhm.
Pynchon didn't even think much about, he sent his wife away for a year to get better because he wasn't confident in good wife Cooper, you know? So you can see all this, like this drumbeat leading up to these witch trials
Mhm.
and the steam building and how the loss of these traditions and, you know, the stoppages to the good energy, good healing, the good medicine that they knew was there, but somehow they were bastardizing it.
Yeah. Calling it impure. I mean, a woman's body was something either to be hidden or used or shamed or,
Yeah, it was a
and,
battlefield.
yeah, literally.
Whipped.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, they were taming the land, they were taming their people, they were taming their money and business, and so, yeah, of course. And then the fresh generation of these people that were gonna lead us right into the witch trials and,
Yep.
and we talk a lot of I the witch trials is something that happened. I mean, it was a year-long thing that happened, but in trying to figure out and this is we could talk about where we go next, where the Puritans ended. Where does the Puritan end? We kinda talked about that. There's no, like, definite end of the Puritan time. There's no moment where they all dropped their brown clothes and put on the beautiful chiffon or whatever of the Revolutionary era,
Mhm. Mhm.
or put the powder wig on, or when that got so the decadence kinda came back in. But, it happened, and so the one gate would be the witch trials, so we're building up
Yeah.
to that,
Yes.
and all of this is happening at this time,
Yep.
and, it just feels like that's the natural thing, and then I don't know much about what happens after, how things are
Yeah.
buried and
Well, I think we're ready to go to talk about these witches we've been leading up to this whole time. Do you?
Mhm. Yeah, I think
And
so.
we'll
This
just
is so important that we talked about today because I think this is the hub of all that.
well, it's like Hamilton. I kept thinking the room where it happens.
Yes, totally.
Upside down here. It's in the birthing room
Yeah,
where little seeds of doubt get sowed, where they're literally wrestling with life and death. And then you have all these outside voices trying to interpret for the women what that birthing room what was happening in there even when they weren't in there.
right.
And what hit me was this lady in the '70s having to rediscover how important the spiritual energy is and to use the intuitive, the touch, the senses, the get to know that woman, get to know when tell in her eyes when she's afraid and help calm her down and fear doesn't belong in that room.
Right.
And
You
in
can't take the energy y if you walk into the Thanksgiving kitchen and put a negative energy in there and try to tell the women how to do your dinner's ruined, you know? Like,
literally,
you
yes.
can't mess with the female energy on stuff like this. It is magic. It is absolute tapping into divine,
Yeah,
powerful things, and you
it exists and it's real. And look at the damage opening that door to that room has done over the years.
wow.
And you wonder if it started in these birthing rooms and, like Springfield, how from that birthing room, Mary Lewis, everything deteriorated.
Yeah. Yes, right. Good
Hey,
job, I love it.
thank you.
Okay, and always, if anybody listening has comments or something to add, I feel like every week we have, I feel like there's someone that wants to add. We need people to email and comment and
I'd
good
love
or
to
bad.
have an episode where we're all talking about how we learned about birth and
Yes.
how we recognize some of these things the 1600 lady was warning about.
Right. Okay, so we're heading to the witch trials.
Yep, it's time.